Hello, everyone, and welcome to another audio podcast around this series, the LabZtorm Impact v.2. It's a retrospective on the British Renal Society, the BRS, between 2010 and 2022. It's another Storm Robotics another Storm Robotics production in collaboration with the Renal Patient Support Group, the RPSG. I'm your host, it's the Shientist, and I'm going to start off by sort of going back to the previous part of the previous audio podcast around 2000, an overview around 2013's British Renal Society conference, in part, and basically where I highlighted a few outlines of a few poster presentations that have been presented at the British Renal Society conference in 2012, and basically where the remit focused on different themes around chronic kidney disease, and one of the presenters at the conference talked about who gets tested or who gets screened for chronic kidney disease. So the guideline is people at risk or suspect or high risk, high risk individuals, and those are mainly who have different sort of primary health conditions, and at least in context in context with guideline practices. But in the real world, this presenter highlighted the fact that at the conference's the British Renal Society conference in 2012 highlighted that in the real world, and that actually relates anyone with a comorbidity, anyone on medication, and predominantly the elderly. And in line with with the 2013 British Renal Society conference, the BRS conference 2013. I'm going to highlight a little bit around that, and before I do that, as well, I'm going to highlight a bit more again around the overview of how the British Renal Society has now been linked to be known as the UKKA Association. So it was in June 2021, the multi-professional focus of the British Renal Society and its affiliates merged with the work of the UK Renal Registry and the 71-year history of the Renal Association to create or to develop the membership, develop one membership, the UK Kidney Association, or the UKKA. And the UKKA has affiliations linked with the UK Renal Registry, KQIP, the Renal Pharmacy Group, a Rare Renal, the British Association of Paediatric Nephrology, and the SPR Club, Specialist Registrar Club, and also Patient View, which is linked with, which has been linked more recently with an organisation known as Patient Knows Best. And then I also, in the previous audio podcast, or part one of this audio podcast, I talked about how Professor John Feehally in nephrology highlighted an overview of some of the historical view around around the British Renal Society and the Renal Association, etc., in a YouTube video, which is accessible through the UK Kidney Association and provides personal reflections on the Renal Association achievements during the 71 years that the organisation has been around. And so, following on, I'm now going to talk a little bit about the British Renal Society conference that took place in 2013, and in this audio podcast, I'm going to highlight a bit more around some of the main aspects of some of the more intricate aspects around chronic kidney disease as part of some of the highlights that came out of the British Renal Society conference that took place in 2013. The conference took place in Manchester, in Northwest United Kingdom, also in 2013, and there was works where one of the presenters from the York Teaching Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust highlighted that it was important to have the empowered renal multi-professional team, and part of the presenters notes were to included for example, where the aims were in their work was to have shared understanding of goals and values. There should be a culture of trust, respect, and integrity, and clear team processes should include effective communication skills and knowledge relevant to particular tasks, and knowledge of and respect for each other's contributions. Flexible structures to support team processes included appropriate skill mix, effective, responsive, proactive, being effective, responsive, and having a proactive leadership. And so, in line with, for example, effectiveness of successful clinical teams, this presenter at the British Renal Society in 2013 highlighted that quality of teamwork is directly and positively related to quality of patient care and positive outcomes in healthcare. In addition, the positive outcomes in healthcare and being effective teams are characterized by clear leadership, high levels of integration, good communication, and effective team processes. That being said, this presenter also highlighted that leadership in clinical teams is critical but often absent. So they then give a definition, and it's from works that was published by the Department of Health, at least in some contexts. And so the sort of definition the presenter at the BRS 2013 highlight is that good leadership is central to good team working. The most effective model is that of a number of leaders within the team. In more developed teams, this distributed leadership is associated with higher levels of effectiveness and positive positive patient outcomes, better quality of teamwork, and better team processes. So it was it was in this remit, the the team sorry the at the British Renal Society conference, much like in 2013, much like the one in 2012, focused from a focused presentations from a sort of a multidisciplinary approach. And I'm now going to highlight a little bit about one of the a few of the poster presentations that actually were quite in some contexts were quite groundbreaking, and so yes, so one of the ones that came that was actually really quite informative was so there was a poster presentation on patients program for young renal patients pre and post transitioning from pediatric nephrology services to adult nephrology services. And in this work, this team from the Sheffield, it was the Sheffield Teaching Hospitals and the Nottingham University Hospitals NHS Trust, and the Derby Hospital NHS Foundation Trust. They highlighted in their works a little bit about what was happening in relating to pediatric nephrology services, in pediatric nephrology services and adult nephrology services. And primarily they looked at sort of definitions around expertise in relating to peer support, and in this work, in this poster presentation, there are some direct quotations from the research that was conducted. I'm not gonna read out everything in this work, but this work in this particular collaborative effort was actually pretty groundbreaking at the time. It was actually funded by the British Kidney Patient Association, the BKPA. The BKPA has a different. It goes by a different name now. The organisation goes under the name of Kidney Care UK, and so this work was sort of groundbreaking in its own way. There was some works in relating to an overview, really, from the British from the British Transplantation Society, that was presented by one of the nephrologists, who at the time was a reader in renal medicine in the Division of Clinical Sciences, in a particular at St George's Hospital, St George's University of London. And he provides this nephrologist provides an overview and summary of the draft British Transplantation Society guidelines on the management of failing transplants. So I'm going to read a little bit. I'm going to read a little bit around what this particular health professional says or highlights. So it begins with guideline on skin cancer surveillance. So skin examined annually by trained healthcare professionals should be part of a procedure. Immunosuppression treatment should be reviewed routinely. When this work was presented by this nephrologist, he highlighted that, for example, one of the mainstream immunosuppression regimens known as sirolimus may be considered in those with skin or cancer, skin cancer or related conditions, and a treatment known as acitretin could be used as well. And alongside this, this nephrologist highlights the British Renal Society at 2013 the guideline on management. In addition to the guideline on management of immunosuppression, he mentions that consideration must be given to the relative risk of managing immunosuppression after return to dialysis and relisting for a repeat renal transplantation or renal transplant or kidney transplant. And then the second point was that the clinical benefit of immunosuppressive drug tapering withdrawal, and tapering or withdrawal. And then finally the risk of de novo allosensitization that may preclude or prevent options for future renal transplantation, and particularly relevant for young patients who are likely to require retransplantation within their lifetimes. And so, in line with this, this nephrologist also talks a little bit about something referred to as HLA specific antibody screening, so human leukocyte antigen specific antibody screening. So screening at 4 weeks after change in immunosuppression, antibody screening during a workup, and on return to the transplant waiting list should be undertaken according to the British Transplantation Society or British Society of histocompatibility, hematology and immunology, and guidelines for detection and characterization of clinically relevant antibodies in solid organ transplantation. So if already sensitized at the time of graft failure with high levels of broadly reactive antibodies, the risk of additional sensitization occurring subsequent to change in immunosuppression changes in immunosuppression is low or are low. So if a patient has received a previous HLA mismatch transplant and is non-sensitized and has low antibody levels, tapering and or immunosuppression withdrawal is likely to result in the patient becoming highly sensitized. And so as part of the remit of the conference, another presentation was provided by someone who has a health professional who had a background in aspects of nephrology as a counselor in nephrology, and presented some works surrounding issues surrounding transplant or allograft or transplant failure. And so some context around this was where the presenter talked a little bit about the health beliefs So what does losing, to begin with, what does losing the transplant mean to a patient? And so health beliefs determine much, how much, um, how much generally, whether patient or health professional want to be in control. If we feel frightened, angry, sad, and how if we feel if people feel frightened, angry, sad, and also how proactive people are when they can take care or control of aspects of healthcare. And there is a paper that this presenter highlighted that dates back actually to the 1980s surrounding sort of health beliefs. So apparently, in line with this, there is no one size that fits everyone, that fits all. Around this, this presenter highlighted some aspects of anxiety. So patient sense of threat increases. Patient sense of ability to cope decreases. The news of a transplant is failing may make the patient feel unsafe. The patient's reaction depends on previous experiences, and there is works by an author and co-authors in this work that was cited from 2007. This presenter talked a little bit about at the British Renal Society conference in 2013. Talked a little bit about denial as well. So denial apparently is a coping strategy, and there's works by an author that published works in 2003 that provide more definitions. So denial can have an effect on regimes if a person believes he or she is fine, but actually might not be. And this presenter highlighted that a sort of sledgehammer approach, where health professionals almost force patients to be aware of risks, etc., around aspects of healthcare, just doesn't work. And so, in line with this as well, in line with this, there was a poster presentation in relating to a sort of a drug monitoring approach in relating to particular immunosuppression and whether particular health professionals' involvement bring positive sort of experiences. And I'm not going to read the overview around that poster presentation, but I am going to say that the theme around the British Renal Society conference in 2012 was sort of a subsequent continuation of the British Renal Society conference that took place in 2012. And so, with that also in mind, as the British Renal Society has continued, more recently in 2000, so from 2014 pretty much onwards, there have been efforts and some proactive efforts in relating to involvement, where there's cross collaborations between patients and health professionals and patients. However, unfortunately, there are serious inconsistencies around that, and so therefore, in around in the more recent times. So in between 2021 and 2022, for example, the remit had been more aware, for example, where the UK Kidney Association were hosting their conference online, sort of online, and making it available, making the conference remit available to both patients and professionals, owing to, for example, the issues around COVID-19, and the pandemic. Um, and so the UK Kidney Association has developed more structure in aspects of more structure around aspects of involvement. But again, a lot of the works that continue to be sort of highlighted and presented at the UK Kidney Association are in part, or in most parts, are left by in most part, in relate to the legacy left by Professor Donald O'Donoghue, who was referred to the Tsar of Nephrology before he passed away with COVID-19, and generally speaking, Professor Donald O'Donoghue had a remit where a lot of his research and focus had actually been around supporting those as frontline professionals, and although very in some contexts very sort of a humble approach. However, at the same time, health professionals, being health professionals, unfortunately do not unfortunately find that if they do not find that patient initiatives around patient care or patient involvement based work or research, generally, unless there is a link or an affiliation between sort of those main organizations, then generally frontline professionals still only really care, unfortunately, around for other frontline professionals. And pediatric nephrology, and those young people transitioning from pediatric services or nephrology to adult nephrology services, for example, are still a minority population in comparison to, for example, in the British Renal Society and the UK Kidney Association, as it's known now, have this remit where, for example, those who are elderly or those who are approaching more, those who are at the population at the older age, where kidney disease becomes more obvious. So if that's the remit, then the UK Kidney Association still holds on very sturdy onto the legacy around Professor Donald O'Donoghue, but unfortunately with Professor Donald O'Donoghue's legacy, it's not inclusive. He focused very much on frontline professionals, and frontline professionals, the way they are and have been, is frontline professionals are more for frontline professionals, and actually, unfortunately, don't actually care for patients at all. because and I can say this, I can say this to anyone and everyone openly, because generally speaking, in line with patient care, and in line with collaboration around the renal patient support group, no one from the renal patient support group, the RPSG, has been approached by any nephrologist to collaborate, or any researchers to collaborate, although it's always a platform available for researchers and investigators, whether frontline health professionals or those who do research as part of their continuing practice, as other healthcare professionals, is always available. And so there is a difference. There is a difference in mindset, and to this day, and we're talking about where the Renal Association has been established in over 70 years, and is actually not inclusive, in areas of practice, and in areas of practice, is actually failing mainly young patients, those in pediatrics and in and young adults, because again the mindset is where frontline health professionals only look at kidney disease when it relates to elderly patients or older patients, and that is actually pretty much travesty. And so other than in line with this, between 2010 and 2022, there have been lots of guidelines and documents and frameworks to prompt areas of involvement. And in that time, by the way, listeners, the Renal Patient Support Group, RPSG, is available, has been available, and is linked with a pediatric equivalent on social media platform known as the Kidney Disease and Renal Support Group, or KDARS for kids. And both organizations, between the two organizations, has over or close to or near to 12,000 members internationally. So actually, from a social media perspective or platform, and between the two, there are patients, there are carers, there are health professionals involved in between those two social media platforms. And actually, when you think about it, are supporting without any salary at all, no funding or very little funding at all, supporting in the crux of things, almost like a small nation. Still to this day, the UK Kidney Association has still not been able to do that, and yet have many health professionals involved at various levels, various grades, and they still cannot do what the Renal Patient Support Group do, with money, with funding, with backing behind them. In that context, it is actually quite appalling. And so this is an overview, and part two, around this sort of retrospective on the British Renal Society, or BRS, 2010 to 2022. I'm going to end this audio podcast now, and the next one will focus on another area of nephrology, in collaboration with the Renal Patient Support Group, the RPSG. I've been your host, the Shientist. This is a series around the LabZtorm Impact v.2. It's been another Storm Robotics production in collaboration with the Renal Patient Support Group, RPSG. Thank you for taking the time to listen.